I have to tell you, hey, a child was murdered in the conflict, and they ask you from which group, we've lost it all. We've lost it all. We have no human connection anymore. And that's the saddest part to me, the world that I realize that we are living in, the world that I have chosen to have children to live in. That is so brutal to me, painful.
Welcome to the Kindness Is podcast, where we take a deep dive into the true meaning of kindness. I'm your host, Kaitlin Johnstone, the co-founder of Kind Cotton. Let's dive in.
Wake up.
I have been thinking for months now about how we continue to show up for people. How do we let people know that we love and support them while they are grieving? How do we also use our privilege? A thought I have contemplated for years. Our guest this week is a beautiful example of doing just that. After listening to this podcast, I want to urge you all to listen and follow Palestinian Voices, because Western media hasn't made it that easy for us to do so. Actively seek out Palestinian creators and learn from their content. Use your power here in America to demand a ceasefire for all of this unnecessary killing of innocent civilians to stop. This will also allow for a continued return of hostages. You know, this episode is coming out on Christmas, and Bethlehem canceled Christmas this year. Let that sink in to your heart. Don't allow for any life to be seen as collateral damage. Listen, learn, and lead with empathy and openness. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Kindness Is podcast. Today, I am so honored to be in conversation with Lynn. She is a first-generation Palestinian American who was raised by two Catholic Palestinian parents. She is also a clinical licensed associate counselor who believes deeply and passionately about mental health, humanity, and justice issues for all oppressed groups. Her work focuses on amplifying the voices of those being silenced and creating safe spaces during these horrific times to connect with one another. Lynn, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
I am too. And so Lynn and I, just brief history, only connected a couple of days ago as we were invited into a mom's group on Instagram, and I started looking at all of your stuff, and I was deeply drawn into your passion and your hunger for humanity and your voice. And I think it's really important that as a white woman who talks about kindness in a very multifaceted way, that I have voices of all humans on our podcast to share your story. So again, I am very, very happy that you were here.
Thank you so much. I saw your profile and I knew right away that I would definitely be open to doing a podcast with you. I think we might have exchanged like 2 messages before you were want to do a podcast, and I'm like, yes, I'm down, because I think that I could really sense when someone authentically cares about a cause, and I felt that from you. So thank you for having me and for doing this and for amplifying the voices of so many people who have been silenced for so long.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that's really important. And the first video that I really took in and absorbed from you was your personal story post 9/11. And I was hoping that you could share that, because I think, and don't get me wrong, when I say this, as anyone who has ever listened to anything that I've shared or have been interested in any conversation that I have ever had with anyone, I think that more often than not, we discuss racism in America, and we don't often discuss Islamophobia in America or any sort of anti-Arab hate. And while I think that racism in America is just as important and we need to continue talking about it, and there have been so many performative actions that have been taken, particularly in the past 3 years, your story is one that doesn't often get told.
Mm. Yeah, no, it doesn't. That video was really personal to me too, because as soon as I shared it, I had probably 20 comments in like 20 seconds, of other people sharing their exact story. And these people were Pakistani, Muslim, Iranian. I mean, just anyone who I think America and Western media has done such a good job of lumping all together under one very ugly word. And so any of us who look like we may fit this profile that Western media has created for us has really felt the impacts of the post 9/11 world, and are feeling it even more so right now.
Yeah, I think so too. And being someone who was in New York at the time, I can remember, I mean, I was only 16, but I, similarly to you, found out when I was in school, and I can remember this intense fear, obviously, but then unpacking this as an adult and going back to the way in which Western media villainized people, I can also remember irrational fear
Mhm.
in the months going forward.
Yeah.
Something in which I had no right to fear people who, as you mentioned, fit a very bold, blanketed description of what we were supposed to fear at that time. And now sitting with that and thinking how propaganda worked on me,
Mhm.
and now recognizing that that wheel is turning again,
Yeah.
and many, many, many people who look like me, particularly white women, I always think it's important to name that, are being silent,
Mhm.
must be incredibly difficult for you.
Oh, it's so incredible. Well, there are so many layers to it. I think, post 9/11, I internalized a lot of shame, and a lot of fear for who I was. I think the propaganda worked on me too, despite the fact that I had, many Palestinian family members who were educating me. I think I just felt really ashamed, not of who I was, but how I was identified by the world. And from that moment forward, I never spoke about being Palestinian again, until I was much, much older. I really tried to blend in. People would say, "Where are you from?" And I would say that I'm from Israel, because that was more digestible. And I am an Israeli citizen, and I have over 100, Palestinian relatives who live in Israel. But it's occupied Palestine, so it's very hard for us Palestinians to say that we are from Israel. But we are, and that is more digestible in the West. And so that's the narrative that I went with. On 9/11, I too, like you, was young, and I was 14 years old, and I was in a photography class, and I remember my teacher running to the television, and she broke down crying, and we were all crying. We were all so scared. Nobody wants anybody to die, and it was just a horrific moment and a scary moment. And I felt a part of everyone else. I felt like I was a part of the collective pain. But then we went to another class, and then we had an earlier lunch at 10:45. And I bring up that detail because it's just like so embedded in my memory, that it was the morning time. And, I was sitting there eating my lunch, and my childhood friend who lived probably 5 houses down the street from me said, "Your people did this. Your uncle did this. Your cousins did this. You are a terrorist." And then he proceeded to physically harm me by throwing a metal chair that we were all sitting on and eating lunch on at my head. And it all happened so fast. I was brought to the principal's office and sent home from school early. My mom picked me up. I think that was the moment I realized I was being othered. I was never going to belong with the collective. I could never experience what the collective was experiencing or feel the pain of the collective. And that's probably why what is happening right now is so impactful to me and so many Palestinian Americans, because for the first time, I can say Palestine without it feeling like a curse word. I can talk about my culture and do it with pride. Even though I am scared, I know that there are so many people all around the world who are supporting me. And even at the protests, I went to DC, I went to Manhattan, and in one of the protests in the city, I've been to the city so many times, like I remember being like, never in my entire lifetime did I think I was going to see so many Palestinian flags flooding the streets. Like I never thought I would imagine that happening in my lifetime.
I would imagine that even in the darkest of moments, provides you with some hope.
Yeah, it does. In waves.
Yeah. And I can also imagine that opening your phone on any given day or hearing stories from family members, you're also hit back in the face with reality. And that is something that I can't even imagine what you and your family are going through. And I'm immensely sorry. And I want to know, because I know what I have done or what I feel as though people can do, who are looking at this from the safety of their own homes. But what can people do? How can people not only use their voice and stand up for humanity, but how can people support other Palestinian Americans right now?
Oh my gosh. I think there are so many different ways. First and foremost, I think the most important way is to educate yourself, to learn about the history, and to understand that although what happened on October 7th was devastating because lives were lost, it did not begin on October 7th. I think there's been one very strong narrative sold to us, just like the history of America has been sold to us, right? And we now have more access to information and the truth than ever before. So if you're choosing not to access that education, that's very painful. If you're choosing not to look, that's very painful. On my profile, I have pinned, 2 posts with about 42 different people that are just tagged, just names and tags. Just click them and follow, click them and follow.
Mm.
Like, you have to look. You can't be so committed to not wanting to learn and to staying in the lane in which you were brought up that you just don't even want to look. Because I know if you looked, I know if you read, I know if you searched, I know that your perspective would change, because the truth is quite literally, concretely right in front of us.
And you have to actively look, which is kind of the scary part, right, of social media and algorithms and the stuff that is being fed to us. Because as you mentioned, if you don't see it. So early on, my mom lives in a mother-in-law suite, like right in our home pretty much, but kind of separated. And I went over to her immediately and I said, "Please, Mom, you watch the news every night and you follow Western media, and regardless of if you recognize this or not, I'm taking your phone right now and I'm following these Palestinian voices because it's important for you to know that there is information from everywhere. And as you mentioned, horrific, right? Horrific what happened on October 7th. Just like you said with 9/11, no one is saying that lives lost is something that should not be mourned, is something that should not make us all incredibly sad. But what we are saying is that there's a lot of information that you need to know on top of that. And then on top of that, even if you don't know all of that information, all of the horror and destruction that is taking place now
Right.
is not okay just because it's a retaliation, right?
Right.
And that's what, we're hearing. War is war. I mean, there are so many things that shows us that this is not that, and that is not okay by any means. So I kind of want to hear your thoughts on that too.
I mean, that's the part that blows my mind. I mean, we are seeing the propaganda, like, it just at levels of terrifying I've never seen before, but it's so poorly done and glaringly obvious. And if that does not invite you or motivate you to look, I don't know what will. My perspective and what bothers me so much is that if this were happening to any other group of people, including Jewish people, I would be screaming from the rooftops, because I stand for humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Ethical oath to stand for humanity. I've checked all my isms and my microaggressions, and I've reflected, and my program has forced me to do that. I am someone who really values the sanctity of life. And what saddens me about October 7th and the days before that and the days after that and 9/11 and about every single group who has suffered is that we are all a product of corrupt government. No government cares about us. No government is putting our well-being at the forefront of anything. We're all pawns: Jewish, Palestinian, Muslim, any single group of people who are suffering in any way, who have had to experience the tragedy of lives lost, need to recognize that we are pawns in a much larger game, if that's what you want to call it. It doesn't mean our real life, but we're all pawns. And so this is a moment where we need to just like take a second and recognize, like, this is not the fault of Jewish people. This is not the Palestinian people. This is not the fault of any group of people. This is the fault of irresponsible, corrupt, money hungry, greedy, power hungry governments. And we're doing exactly what they want us to do. We're turning against each other. We're turning our backs against each other, and we're not valuing the sanctity of life equally. If I have to tell you, hey, a child was murdered in the conflict, and they ask you from which group, we've lost it all. We've lost it all. We have no human connection anymore. And that's the saddest part to me. The world that I realize that we are living in, the world that I have chosen to have children to live in, that is so brutal to me, painful. Truly.
Yeah. No, it is, to see comments and to have actually heard comments that this is quote unquote sad, but it is, what is the word I'm looking for? Almost collateral damage when talking about a human life.
Yeah.
Is something that no one should be able to get past. And you brought up something that's very, very important. And I've heard it said so many times, but yet it's still a point of contention for so many people, is that I love my Jewish friends with every ounce of my being.
Mm.
And I will stand against anti-Semitism and the people in Florida when I was still living in Florida who were actual neo-Nazis standing with signs about wanting to get rid of Jewish people. And our governor at the time said that it was freedom of speech, right? I will stand against that with every ounce of my being. I will read books to my child so that she learns about other cultures and embraces people for their uniqueness and loves them for their differences and doesn't other them the way in which you have said that you have experienced. I will do that to every ounce of my being. However, we have to understand that people are not their governments.
Right.
And that was the part that you were talking about, right? We can love people and want to support people and stop the hate that is happening to people, and also stop the anti-Arab hate and Islamophobia, and be inclusive and stand up against that too. I use Jewish in that narrative because I feel like oftentimes when I say anything about Palestine, I am met with, well, why aren't you saying XYZ? Which I have many of times. But yeah, or that there's some sort of anti-Semitism behind that. And I'm like, my mind is blown because all I want for Jewish people as well is to live safely in harmony and know that they are loved and protected too.
I mean, humanity at the forefront. You bring up something really interesting, the idea of anti-Semitism. I mean, first of all, it's real. It's a real concept, and nobody wants to see it. But when we talk about the hate that is happening for people who support Palestine, I just challenge everyone to understand that we don't have a word. We don't have a word. Islamophobia does not, first of all, it stems in the word phobia, which means fear of, not hate toward. And secondly, I'm not Muslim. And so many Palestinian people, there are Christian Palestinians, there are Jewish Palestinians. And so it's not fully encompassing, representing the experience that we're enduring here. I think anti-Arab comes close. But at the end of the day, it doesn't feel like the empathy is equal. The representation of our pain is equal. No one is asking to say, hey, value me more than your own life, but let's represent us with language, with love, with compassion, with humanity, all equally.
That part. I mean, it goes back to simply explaining to many Americans for so long why we say Black Lives Matter, right? No one is saying that my life does not matter. We're just saying that there is a group of people who have historically been oppressed in our country, and we need to put at the forefront of everyone's brain that their life should be valued as much as my life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If we're not talking about what is happening to oppress Black people in America and the systems that need to change, then we are not addressing all lives equally.
Yeah. I'm just saying, I'm taking a moment to just breathe and process and be grateful for you sharing this space with me, to be completely honest with you. And I want to know, since this is the Kindnesses podcast and we've talked a lot about a lot of things, what would true kindness look like to you?
I think, to me, kindness, people often equate with politeness or manners, right? So like, I feel compelled to have to say this thing to you because it's polite, because it's the right thing to do, but there's no authenticity behind it. And what I look for in kindness is action to the words that you're saying. Otherwise, I prefer you just don't say them at all. But I can't go on pretending you're a kind person when there's no meaning behind your words. The people I genuinely connect with, they're kind, because they're not just saying the thing that they feel is socially necessary, right? Or societally necessary to say. They're saying the thing that they want to say because they genuinely feel it. It's kindness is empathy. It's saying, you know, I believe your experience. You know, I might not understand it, right? And that's kindness too, that honesty. I may not understand what you're going through. Actually, I know I don't understand what you're going through, but I feel really horrible watching you go through what you're going through, and I want to help you. How can I help you? What's the best way that within my capabilities I can help you? And I think that I often go above and beyond. I try so hard to respond to every person who is taking a moment to respond to me. I don't value myself as any more important. First of all, I had like 1,200 followers. So like I am quite literally not anybody important. I'm just a person with real life experiences that are relevant right now and important right now. So I try really, really hard to just make sure that everyone who is being kind, everyone who I feel this genuine connection with, that is genuinely in pain and suffering, watching my pain and suffering, I want to extend that kindness back. I want to respond. I want to acknowledge them. I want them to know that I heard them and it's received and I appreciate it. And I'm here to support them too. And that none of us are more important than the other. We are all equal.
It's beautiful and so important. And that empathy piece of, I may not understand and I may not have had to go through your experience to do what's right, is so, I mean, we could talk about that for everything, right?
Mhm.
For everything. I used to say early on in the beginning of the pandemic, I may not have had to have had a family member die of COVID for me to wear a mask.
Right?
I may not have had to have a family member, which I find it very hard to believe if this would even be true, or someone I love who is in the LGBTQ plus community, for me to speak out for their rights. I may not have to have my children be followed by the police for no reason due to the color of their skin for me to talk about police brutality. Like, and this goes with the times right now too, right? Like, I may not have to have Palestinian family members facing the absolute destruction that is happening for me to call my representatives and ask for them to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. It's saying, I believe your experience. I have
Mhm.
experienced your experience, but I believe your experience. And it's interesting because when we look at trauma in children, we see that those who have better mental health outcomes are those who have had a compassionate witness.
Mm.
Someone who has said, I believe you, I care about you, and I'm here with you. And that does not need to mean I experience the same trauma you've experienced, but I am here as your compassionate witness. And
Mm.
I think that is very, very suited as a description for kindness, being someone's compassionate witness.
Yeah, for sure. Lynn, before we wrap this up, where can people follow you and support you if you would like to share? Where can people be in community with you? I think now more than ever, and we've touched upon this a little bit throughout this episode, but it's important to be in that community, to heal together, to talk with one another with kindness and empathy. And where can people do that?
So my Instagram account is where I'm most active right now, and it's the Gentle Counselor, and that's where I'm most responsive. I also have a TikTok account where I've been censored so much, but I'm trying really hard to continue to post on Instagram and reshare to TikTok. So I'm reaching my audiences across both platforms. But yeah, so that's it for right now. We'll see.
Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you so much too.
Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of the Kindness Is podcast. If you love it and it's adding even a little bit of value to your life, we would love, love, love if you could subscribe, rate, and review so we can reach even more people and make this world a little bit more kind.